Welcome back to Wide Angle. We are talking about the challenges of evacuating Indians from conflict zones, the most recent case being Iraq, but we were also looking at the examples of Lebanon in 2006 and Libya in 2011. One of the things about Iraq, and we have seen this, is the enormous amount of diplomatic activity that we have seen in recent days. Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj has been talking to all her Gulf counterparts. The National Security Advisor, Mr. Doval, has been talking to his counterparts in the region. And the Foreign Secretary, Sujata Singh, has been on the line talking to our ambassadors, the Indian ambassadors in the region, as well as her counterparts in many of these countries. And all of this has led to the happy development that the 46 nurses who have been a source of much concern because they had been moved forcibly from Tikrit to Mosul are hopefully now on their way back home. But Rajiv, if I may come back to you, what are the kind of lessons learned from the experiences? You talked of the hostage issue where there were complicated negotiations. You talked of the Lebanon Operation Sukoon. Yeah. All of this seems to require an enormous amount of coordination between very many different kinds of players.
I think the biggest lesson is that our Indians in that region, in the Gulf region, are extremely vulnerable. The numbers are stupendous, 7 million.
7 million in the Gulf region.
In the Gulf region. And therefore, it is beyond the capacity of any organization or combination of organizations, the Navy, the commercial ships, the other ships, or the aircraft, civilian, private sector. It's impossible that if there were if such a situation were to say arise in the UAE or Saudi Arabia or any of the other Gulf countries.
Which has about how many? Almost 2 million?
2 million plus in Saudi Arabia, about the same number in the
UAE.
In the UAE, large numbers in the hundreds of thousands in Kuwait,
Oman,
Bahrain. Qatar. So these are very large-scale operations, and I don't think that we should be looking at evacuation of citizens on such a large scale. Therefore, we have to look at how we can contribute to ensuring that they are stable there. And I think that there is a case for India getting more involved in Gulf security and stability. I think we have taken too much of a hands-off approach because our stakes are so high there. And if a 10 or 15,000 people you have such a crisis, can you imagine what it would be with hundreds of thousands of people? It would be a political crisis. It would be a destabilizing situation for India. And therefore, I think that we also need to streamline our process of immigration control, the protector of immigrants. For example, a lot of the Indians who are there, as you mentioned yourself, are illegal. They have been duped into going. They say, oh, we are going to take you to Dubai.
Let me ask a specific question. Do we have a database? I mean, let's say the embassy in Saudi Arabia have a database on the Indians working in Saudi Arabia, or the one in Kuwait have a database for the Indians in Kuwait, and so on?
They do have a database, but it's obviously not complete because a lot of the Indians get there through third countries. I was just going to make the point that there could be people who are going on a tourist visa to Dubai, and then from there go to Iraq, because the agent has duped them and said, "Aap Dubai mein kaam karenge," then you find yourself in Iraq, and they are without papers. Also, typically, most of the Indians who are working there, their passports are confiscated. Then they are not given money, so they are reluctant to leave because they are owed few months back pay and so forth. And so they find themselves in an illegal situation and they are caught in a jam. Now, one of the things which I feel that our authorities should do is that any time you give a person an immigration clearance, you have to ask him, please keep a copy of your passport. Please, and the passport issuing authority should keep a copy of that passport with themselves and with the relatives, so that when the passport is lost or taken away or not returned, there is some basis on which you can proceed. Otherwise, oh, are you an Indian, are you not? You know, these kind of problems arise.
Atul, you've traveled widely in this region and interacted with the Indian diaspora in West Asia, in the Persian Gulf region. I mean, how easy or how connected is this diaspora to the embassy, and what is the role of the Indian associations in terms of acting as an interface?
I mean, there is a connection. There's a credible connection of the consulates and the embassy with the diaspora. There is no doubt about it. Plus, there are these associations which you just spoke about it. Every state in India has more than a single association. So, especially those who are from Kerala and the south are politically very, very conscious and follow the news of what's happening in India very closely, and that gets reflected in their interaction with the missions as well. So that's one. But there is another segment, especially those who are come in the labor community, for example, what Rajiv just said, who come in on a visit visa, and then that visa gets expired and they are transferred to somebody else, right? So the embassy, which should have a database, does not have the database of these individuals who are in sizable numbers as well. So it's sizable number, yes, because there's a mixed record here. There is an attempt of the database to expand, and there have been efforts done to that effect, but there are a large number of people who are coming in whom you cannot trace when you want to in a time of crisis. So, I mean, we need to streamline that, and we would need not only to take an initiative here back home, but also with the host country to prevent such exercise of transfer of visa, of a visit visa, and allowing it to be transferred to somebody else. The authorities know it, but the host country has been appraised of it, but is not acting. So it has to be a joint effort. But the point which Rajiv was making, larger engagement of India and the host countries is required, and also on a culturally sensitive plane, because I think that's another very important element. Because if you talk about diplomacy, the Emiratis, I've lived in UAE from 2006 onwards, they would like to do a lot of things and cooperate with you behind the glare of media and behind the scenes. That is a kind of culture. But if you want, to do everything up front, they're not comfortable with this. So you got to be a little sensitive.
Well, I think we know the value of sometimes working behind the scenes, and I'm sure that many of these successes that we've been able to achieve, including the recent one with the case of the nurses in Iraq, has been in a lot of ways due to the fact that we've been able to go behind the scenes and talk to different players on the scene, because very often you have in a conflict zone very fluid boundaries. We don't know who is in control. We don't know what is the role or the authority of the central government. But there was one question you mentioned, Atul, and that is the role of the media. Now, let's look at that for a moment, because we have, for the last 10 days, what we have seen almost continuously, front page news, every television channel, talking about the plight of Indians in Iraq. Is this, how positive or otherwise is a development like this, where it pushes the government and it forces things to take place in the glare of publicity, which, as you yourself said, is not necessarily the best way forward?
Surely not. But there is a certain dynamic of the media over here, and it is extremely competitive. Plus, there is let me be honest about it, there's a commercial element to it. People are interested in TRP ratings, etc. And if they think, so it's not the media, old style media anymore. It's a very aggressive, intrusive media. Somewhere we have to define the rules of the game. I think 26/11 was one incident where this came so much into the limelight about the need to show restraint at certain moments. Being a media person myself, I hate to be censored or be told what to do and what not to do. But I think in the larger interest, there can be certain rules of the game which can be worked out between the stakeholders and the media. So that's something we need to do over here. Second thing which has happened is the role of technology which has come in. You see, the nurses, for example, you could call them up. I mean, my colleagues were calling them up and talking to them. So there was a flow of information which was coming through channels which was out of control of Mr. Akbaruddin, who was the JSXP here.
Well, Mr. Akbaruddin actually cautioned people and said, please don't do this, because by doing this you may be jeopardizing their security. So, but yes, but there has to be some kind of limits which need to be laid down. But taking up from another point which Rajiv mentioned, Admiral, which is, Rajiv mentioned that India needs to be far more involved with security in this region, given the large amount of Indian diaspora, 6 to 7 million. Yes. Now, how do you look at it from a naval perspective? Because this has to be maritime in a sense.
You see, this is a narrative which is not new. I think Sardar K.M. Panikkar, the famed actually doyen of Indian maritime thought, wrote in his letters to Pandit Nehru and thereafter in a book that we need to study and stabilize on a maritime strategy from Malacca to from Socotra to Malacca. That means Gulf of Aden to the Malacca Straits. These have always been known to be our backwaters. In fact, our area of primary interest. Today, that area stretches from almost the Suez Canal up to the South China Sea because of our trade interests and because of the huge responsibility of maritime security.
Well, this is only going to increase the role of the Indian Navy.
Now, you are absolutely right. One has to remember, in a country like India, which actually dominates the entire Indian Ocean insofar as its geographical construct, size, economy, and slok interests are concerned, because India needs to consider itself as an island nation because of the land borders being cut off for any trade. And therefore, since the Carter Doctrine of 1977 is gone because of shale oil and gas and because of them having withdrawn from Iraq, I think India needs to start moving over there. For that, we need much more focus on force levels for the Navy, which need to be spruced up.
Admiral, thank you for that. And that brings us to the end of this edition of Wide Angle. Thank you for watching.
Ta 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 ta